With one monstrous swing of the bat, did Francisco Alvarez deliver the magic back to the New York Mets?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You amazing Mets fans, you're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. What a difference a game makes. You go from last week with all the disappointment to losing that series against the A's and then eventually not completing the sweep against the Marlins. And there was doubts that kept on creeping in about this Mets team, at least for a day. Everyone's driving to work with a big smile on your face. You're walking your dog this morning with an extra pep in your step. I'm talking to you, Dad. It is an unbelievable thing that one great Mets victory can do for all of us. And Francisco Alvarez delivered. We'll talk about the entire game, but it culminates in an at-bat by Francisco Alvarez where he's sitting 3-0, and Gary Cohen asks Ron Darling and Keith Hernandez, do you think they should give him the green light? And both Keith and Ron say, no, take here. I think Ron Darling said, go turn yourself into a base runner. Turn yourself into a base runner. Well, Carlos Mendoza gave Francisco Alvarez the green light, and Francisco Alvarez had every single intention of using that green light. He was looking for a fastball. He sold out for it, and he put together his biggest possible swing and launched one into orbit as the Citi Field crowd erupted. This is why in the middle of June, when this all started, this run for the Mets, and I did a podcast, why we should be rooting for the Mets to contend this year, something along those lines, why you should be rooting for this team to make a run. And it's moments like this, even if this season doesn't result in a playoff berth, how much fun is it for those in the ballpark especially, but even us watching at home, to see Citi Field get a moment like that, to see Mets fans, jumping out of their seat like kids. I got a picture that I just put on Twitter. I hope you can see it if you're watching on YouTube. It's Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso grabbing each other's arms, shaking each other, jumping up and down like two brothers on Christmas that just got the gift they've been wanting all winter long. And they're just out of their skin excited to see that much enthusiasm. It's so cool. And hopefully this is a turning point, not just a singular moment. But even if it is a singular moment, it's a great one, and you'll look back at Francisco Alvarez Mets career, which we hope is very long and successful, and this is going to be one of those early moments in his career that you think about, because this guy at times has shown that clutch gene to lock in and have a really good at-bat. He almost has a mini Soto shuffle when he takes some of these pitches. It's like, yeah, I got you. I'm seeing that's not a strike, and he gets himself into a hitter's count and just delivers. So that moment was amazing, and I'll say it's the best walk-off of the year until the Mets top it, but that was really special, and it was a really well-played game against a good team. Mark Vientos diving to save runs and making a play at second base, to see JD Martinez in the first inning come through, give the Mets an early lead, some breathing room for David Peterson to work. Pete Alonso, a leadoff double in the fourth inning. He scores on a base hit from Tyrone Taylor. Starling Marte advancing Pete to third base with a sac bunt, getting a base hit, stealing a bag. It was just a really well-played game. The Mets did what they're supposed to do against Trevor Rogers. They get him out of the game in the fifth inning. The Orioles bullpen, prior to that Alvarez at-bat, was lights out. So the Mets ended up seeing the lineup really struggle once they got Rogers out of the game. But they did their job, and David Peterson was exceptional again. So I think there was a lot that you can take from this game and be encouraged about. From Alvarez, of course, maybe this gets him hot. But JD Martinez swinging a hot bat. Pete Alonso starting to contribute more and more. Francisco Lindor, even when he doesn't have the biggest of games, seems like he's hitting the ball hard into the outfield a couple times every single night. playing good defense at shortstop. Vientos, what he's done now in the 2-hole, playing good defense as well. It was just one of those games that reminds you the ceiling of this team. And a big part of his current ceiling also is having David Peterson be your number 3 starter. And it's crazy because I saw this coming in 2022. I didn't see it coming after 2023. I had optimism after we learned about the hip injury he dealt with last year that maybe we could see a return to form from David Peterson. But this is beyond that. This isn't just a return to form. This is a breakout. David Peterson is really figuring it out at the big league level. And all of a sudden, he's looking like the best pitching prospect the Mets have developed since the 2015 Mets. I mean, really, who else is even in the running? Obviously, you have guys that are coming up now with Christian Scott and potentially the promotion of Brendan Sproul at the end of this year or early next year. Those guys certainly have the ceiling to be better than a David Peterson. But David Peterson is proving right now that he is going to be in this rotation for the next couple of years while he's under team control, without a doubt. And he just has figured out his pitch mix. He's attacking the zone, to be able to go up in the zone to get strikeouts with this fastball, to keep it in the bottom part of the zone to get ground balls. His changeup this year has been a revelation. We saw in 2022 the ability to have a really good slider. That's still in the bag for him. And he really did neutralize a very good Orioles lineup. 3 hitters have been red hot for them lately. Adley Rutschman, who is just always a model of consistency. Gunnar Henderson, who at points this year has been an MVP candidate and is going through a good stretch lately. And then you have Jackson Holliday, who has been on a really torrid stretch since coming back up. Those 3 guys against David Peterson today, 3 times through the lineup, 0 for 9 with 3 strikeouts and a double play ball hit by Adley Rutschman. I mean, he really neutralized them. The one guy that got to David Peterson today was Ramon Urias. Now, he scored the first run of the game. That was in the 5th inning. Hit a double. David Peterson, with an errant pickoff there, allows him to advance to 3rd. And then Jackson Holliday hits a ground ball to Pete Alonso that allows the run to score. But besides that, through the first 6 innings, David Peterson had allowed just 4 hits. He walked 1. He struck out 6. And that was the only run that he allowed. And had he not made that error on the pickoff, he would have gone through that entire first 6 innings without allowing any runs. And that run that he did allow was unearned. So you look at where David Peterson was at going into the 7th inning. I had no problem with Carlos Mendoza sending him back out there. Now, did it blow up in his face a little bit? Yes, it did. And it is further evidence that the Mets have been handling Peterson properly by capping him at more 90 pitches instead of 100. And whatever they have learned from looking at the way he throws the ball, the analytics, the pitch data, whatever it is, maybe there is something to it, because he goes back out there for the 7th inning, ends up giving up a leadoff double that comes around to score. But even with that, I honestly felt like it was the right call at the time. I want to see Peterson be able to get that next inning, to be able to go to 100 pitches. And I don't think he was that far off from completing it. He gives up the leadoff double in the 7th, gets a ground out, gets a strikeout. So he was right on the doorstep of stranding that runner and getting through the inning. Then, though, he was trying to rush as the pitch clock was winding down on him before Urias stepped into the box, or as Urias had stepped into the box for that at bat. And he ends up sort of rushing it instead of just stepping off, and he balks in a run. I don't know how much that weighed on him as he then made his first pitch at Urias, but it was an error, a mental error there. And then he throws a pitch that Urias can handle, hits a home run on it. All of a sudden, all of that great work that he had done prior sort of washes away. It's a 3-3 game, but I'll even credit David Peterson. Carlos Mendoza doesn't pull him. He had Jackson Holliday's number all game. He lets Peterson face the lefty, gets a big strikeout, and gets out of that inning, keeps it at a tied game. David Peterson has an ERA of exactly 3 through 14 starts. The Mets are 11-3 when David Peterson toes the rubber. And moving forward, I just think this rotation is full of guys who are at best 3s, and at worst at times they can be 5s. But when they're pitching to their top potential, they have guys that are giving you a chance to win. So I think the rotation is certainly, I don't know if you call it a strength, but it's not a weakness on this team. And the bullpen today was good because you went to Jose Budo in the 8th and Edwin Diaz in the 9th, and it was good to see Edwin look dominant in that 9th inning. And it all leads to Francisco Alvarez getting that chance with 1 out in the 9th inning and hitting the monster home run. So an awesome victory for the New York Mets. Alvarez delivering in that spot is something that we're going to be talking about for years. I think it was a really exceptional home run. Obviously, it becomes more historic or more of a noteworthy moment if the Mets turn this season into something. And I actually think this could be a little bit of a turning point for the team to have a victory like that to build off of. And now, you know what? As much as we talk about, the light part of your schedule, maybe the Mets need to face better teams. And maybe this stretch that lies ahead where they're going up against an Orioles team that's going to sharpen them, make them have to be on top of their game before they head out to face the Padres for 4 games on the road, and then the Diamondbacks after that. Maybe this is what the Mets needed, a tough test before the really important series that lie ahead. And maybe you go on a run against good teams. I want to talk about why this team is in really good shape after this victory. So we'll go through Alvarez, Peterson, also an injury update on Brandon Nimmo. I'll talk about all that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Again, that is all FanDuel customers, not just new customers. So you're going to get with your Google account, you'll get the YouTube base plan. You'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. All you need, again, is that Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, this was a huge moment for Francisco Alvarez tonight, as he has not been swinging a hot bat as of late. I don't think that there was many that were extremely confident when Francisco Alvarez stepped into the box that he was going to deliver. I was pretty confident when I saw, as I mentioned before, the mini Soto shuffle. Maybe it's the troll stare from El Troll, where he looked at that 3-0 pitch. I was like, oh man, Alvarez, he's pretty locked in. But to see that level of a swing that he put on that baseball, look, as much as you could say, all right, well, he was guessing fastball and he guessed right, it's still 98 miles per hour up and in. You have to turn on the ball so quickly. And that's the thing about Francisco Alvarez. He is just scratching the surface of the player that he's going to become. And I've talked about this on the show a bunch. Francisco Alvarez internally has a chance to be the Mets' best player in a couple of years. I think he has the ceiling of being the best catcher of baseball, better than the guy that we're watching the next couple of days, Adley Rutschman, someone that not only delivers on the defensive side, which he's doing already, the way he leads a pitching staff at his age is really impressive, but the extra component that he's going to have at some point is the ability to be a force offensively. We've seen bits and spurts throughout his young career. Last year, it was 25 home runs. To give you elite catching defense and 25 home runs as a rookie, that made him a top 10 catcher in baseball before he even got his feet wet, really. I mean, we ranked him at number 9, I believe, at Just Baseball as far as our top 10 catchers in the game. And that wasn't just me as the managing editor pushing Alvarez along. I had him lower on my list than some other of the writers on our staff that vote on that. There was some that had him as high as 6, I believe. So that shows you the respect that Alvarez already had coming into this year with what he did with his power and his defense. But then we saw stretches this year where it was an on-base approach that was much better. It was hitting for average. Now, a lot of that has gone away. He has been through a prolonged slump. But one big swing in a spot like this could lock him back into place because he is a really talented hitter. He just has to figure out how to deal with the league making these adjustments to him while at the same time carrying so much with him for the pitching staff, what he has to do defensively, and just how much he has to be involved with winning baseball. That's the thing with Francisco Alvarez is behind the dish. The Mets have been a better team. That is a fact. They have one more when he's been healthy and part of this team on a day in, day out basis. So I think his impact can sometimes even go understated when he's not hitting. But now if he does hit down the stretch, that's just another weapon the Mets have. This lineup is so ignitable, and that's what's got to carry them. we could talk about the starting rotation, and I will a little bit on Peterson in a second here. And you could talk about the bullpen being a big area of weakness. But the strength of this team is what has to carry them down the stretch. The Mets need to be averaging 5.5 runs, 6 runs per game throughout the final 5-6 weeks of this season to make sure that they take a lot of that pressure off of a pitching staff that is inherently weaker than some of the other teams in this race. That's what has to happen to see Alvarez have this moment. Hopefully that's a turning point. I think we're definitely seeing JD Martinez come around, and we know what type of a bat he can be. He can carry a lineup for stretches, homers in the game today. Pete Alonso, all of a sudden, we're starting to see more doubles, more home runs, a better approach. Yeah, he's going to still have some ugly strikeouts, but Pete is definitely contributing. Francisco Lindor, as I mentioned earlier, every night he's scorching a couple line drives to the outfield, whether they find some grass and he gets doubles or if they get over the wall. I mean, there's some days with the luck's on his side, other days where they're ending up in outfielders' gloves, but his approach has just been consistent for months now. So you really are starting to see a deep lineup. And honestly, I think this is the deepest team the Mets have had since 2015. If you remember that team, they weren't extremely deep the entire year, but it was a team that just got deeper and deeper as the season wore on, from promoting Michael Conforto to then making the trade for Juan Uribe and Kelly Johnson to then getting Yoenis Cespedes as the big piece of the deadline. Then Lucas Duda and David Wright get healthy, and the whole thing comes together, and that team was just a wagon in August and September. That's what the Mets had the potential to be here with their lineup. You have Jesse Winker able to play a more limited role with Starling Marte coming back, and Marte looks as healthy as he has in a long time. They took their time with him. I think that's going to pay off, and also limiting his playing time down the stretch to keep him fresh. That only bodes well. You see Tyrone Taylor as a fourth outfielder. Compare him to other fourth outfielders we've seen for the Mets the last couple of years. From your, going back, Travis Jankowski was one of the better ones. You had, what was the dude from the Astros? Jake Marisnick, Keon Broxton. There's been a lot of names. Kevin Pillar was one of the better ones, but still, I feel like Tyrone Taylor, his combination of defensive impact and then timely hitting, he's been a really nice piece for the Mets. Harrison Bader being able to come through in big spots. It's just a team that top to bottom has a lot that it brings to the table defensively and offensively, especially when you're going to be able to maybe add another player, whether that's, you hope, a renewed power bat in Brett Beatty with what he's done in AAA lately, or the speed and defense of Luis Angel Acuna as a September call-up. This team's going to get even deeper. So you really have 13 guys that can contribute for this team. And Brandon Nimmo will actually touch on him a little bit more in the next segment because I got some injuries in this wildcard race to discuss. Nimmo is day-to-day. He's not going to see any time on the IL. So that was a huge sigh of relief for the Mets today. And they're also going to get Daniel Nunez back in short order. Carlos Mendoza said he might only need one rehab appearance in Syracuse, which will come on Tuesday. He could join the Mets on their West Coast trip. So that would be a huge piece to add back into that bullpen. If you want to know who might be taken out for Nunez, I talked about that. I think it was in the final segment of yesterday's show. So all of this is to say the Mets are starting to come together. And if they can win this series and carry this momentum on the road, they can actually put themselves right back into a playoff position. And as we'll talk about in the final segment, some things might open things up a little bit more for them to have a more open door to getting in there with one of those spots, as some of these other teams took some big roster hits today. Now, David Peterson, I think, is one of these underrated pieces that has really solidified the floor of this team and even moving forward. Such a great thing for this franchise to have a David Peterson making next to nothing, as is what, hitting arbitration next year probably. I'll check on that right now. But David Peterson is really a solid arm for this team. And you look at what they have now between the upside starts that you get from Severino and Manaea at times and their consistency. Paul Blackburn, outside of facing his former team, has been pretty much a quality start every time. And then there's the wild card who's going to go out there tomorrow, which is Jose Quintana, who I think is sort of your clear number 5 at this point. The Mets are in great shape with their rotation. And David Peterson was arbitration eligible for the first time this year. So he's got 2 more ARB years left before he hits free agency. He's going to be a huge part of the Mets for the next couple seasons. So really awesome to see his development really come together at a perfect time for a stretch run for the Mets. And they also mentioned this on the show on the show today during the broadcast today, how David Peterson, because of the injury, is right in midseason form, and you don't have to worry about any innings limits or anything like that. He's thrown over 100 innings in each of the past 2 seasons. He's at 78 innings right now, so he should be full go to close out this year. And honestly, if you had to predict who's going to make the playoff starts, if the Mets are fortunate enough to get there, if Kodai Senga's not healthy, the game 3 starter would probably be David Peterson. It would be Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, and David Peterson in some order. So that is pretty crazy to think about when his spot in a rotation at all was really in doubt when he was rehabbing from that hip injury. We didn't know if he was going to be able to solidify a spot, and he has done more than that up to this point. So that's been awesome to see. Now, the last segment, we're going to talk about some injuries. Nimmo is okay, but other stars in the division, well, not just the division, in the wildcard race are not. I want to explain the latest going on in the wildcard race in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, run your game. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, the MRI showed no structural damage on Brandon Nimmo's shoulder today, so that was the best possible outcome. He's day-to-day. They actually said he was available off the bench tonight, although he also mentioned after the game that he hadn't thrown and hadn't taken any swings. So there was probably no chance he was getting in there unless it was an absolute necessity or maybe just to do some running. But Brandon Nimmo seems to be good to go very soon. He actually kind of alluded to the fact that he might be cleared for Tuesday's game, but would not commit to it. And if I had to guess, Carlos Mendoza might do what we've seen from him in the past, his strategy of benching one of his star players that's dealing with something and then using them as a sort of super reserve player, putting them into a big spot, having them close out the game. We've seen them do that with Nimmo at one point. I can't remember if Alonso had one of those games. Francisco Lindor certainly did the flu game where he won a game for the Mets with a walk-off. So Nimmo might not be in the starting lineup, but I imagine we see him at some point this series. If it's not starting on Wednesday, it could just be pinch hitting on Tuesday. I think Nimmo is going to be back in short order here, and that is a really good sign for the Mets. But they have so much outfield depth right now. They don't have to rush him back into the lineup. They can take their time. They had the ability to be patient here. I don't know if they're going to play Starling Marte a third straight day. I imagine Marte is on the bench on Tuesday, but you can have Jesse Winker in right or left, or maybe it is Winker in left, Bader in center, Taylor in right. You could put Jeff McNeil in right with Winker in left, Bader in center. Keep Taylor off your bench for that flexibility of the defense. Start Iglesias at second with Vientos at third. The Mets have a lot of options with that super deep team that I was talking about in the last segment. So really good news on that front. And you don't want to call injuries around the league good news, but if you're just specifically looking at it from the Mets point of view, there was things that happened today that does open the door a little bit more for them to get right back into this playoff picture, because for the Braves, they were dealt another devastating blow. Austin Riley was hit in the hand, and he does have a fractured hand. So Riley out for the season. They just got Michael Harris back. They were hoping to get Ozzie Albies back soon, and they still can, but you go from looking like a healthy team for the first time in a while with Harris in that lineup, with Austin Riley swinging a better bat, Matt Olson starting to come around, still having Marcell Ozuna doing what he has all year, and the catching situation started to come together. Travis d'Arnaud always been consistent for them. Sean Murphy swinging a better bat. The Braves were starting to look like the Braves a little bit, and now you lose arguably your best player without Acuna. That's a really big hole to try to fill now. And I was looking to see, okay, what are the options for them? They have Luke Williams, who's unproven. They have Brian Anderson, who's proven that he's not very good as a big leaguer, that they can add to their roster. They can go back to Zach Short, who stayed in their organization after getting DFA'd. That'd probably be their best internal option, just having a good defensive third baseman over there who can maybe hit lefties. But they're going to have a hole at third base day in and day out. That's why I think they probably skew more defensive minded. And there is a guy that can pick up off waivers that might just turn into a better player once he's in a Braves uniform. And that's Gio Urshela, good defensive third baseman, a guy that can hit for a high average. Maybe they pick him up and slide him in there at third, but that's a really big loss for them. Not to say the Braves are all of a sudden going to be limited just because they lose Austin Riley, but it's not going to get much easier. And they are already a team that is stretched really thin. So that's the team right above you. The Mets now a game and a half behind the Braves, and the Braves are about to play the Phillies without Austin Riley. If the Mets can stack a couple wins here over this week and the Braves take a step back, all of a sudden the Mets could be right there in that third wild card spot with the chance to maybe even advance beyond that. Which, speaking of, the Arizona Diamondbacks are starting to hit a little bit of a skid themselves. Now, they're playing the Marlins right now, so they won on Monday. But over the weekend, they got swept by the Rays, and Ketel Marte was playing through an ankle injury. Now he's on the IL. Doesn't seem like it's super serious. This is just a way to get him back into completely healthy form for the stretch run. I think their thought is, let's get him healthy and right so he can be the MVP version of himself that they need him to be in September. But that's a big hit for their lineup for a week and a half to lose their best player, and they're already missing their second best player in Christian Walker, as well as Gabby Moreno. So the Diamondbacks looking a little bit more vulnerable as a team that might fall back. And I know on this show recently, I've sort of made it seem like, all right, Padres, Diamondbacks, they're definitely going to make it. The more I think about it, for both of these teams to stay this hot all the way through to the end, it might not be likely that they can each stay atop their game. So there is a chance that one of them falls off a little bit. And with the Marte injury, I think it's more likely the Diamondbacks. So the Mets still have a really good shot here to end up in the playoffs. They got to, handle their own business. They got to win and get past 85 wins, approaching 90. We'll see how many it ultimately takes. I mentioned before, 86 is sort of the least amount I think it's going to take here to get in, but it might be more than that. It's all up to them to go out and win the games, but they're 5.5 games back of the Padres, 4.5 games back of the Diamondbacks, just a game and a half back of the Braves. We've seen the Mets make up that ground before. I think they got a good shot here. I feel a lot better just because of the great victory today, but also if you just take a step back and think about the position the Mets are in, this feels like a season that we're going to remember for sure, and hopefully a stretch run that results in a playoff berth. But at least we will always have August 19th when Francisco Alvarez swung 3-0, delivered a walk-off victory for the Mets. And that, for me right now, is probably the moment of the season. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Thank you all for tuning into the show. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, head over to YouTube or second watch and check out Locked On Sports Today, which is streaming 24/7. Locked On Sports Today is the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports with our local experts from each team, our league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV.